What is up, YouTube? Welcome to PanFro Games, and today we are reviewing the phenomenon named Palworld. Is it Pokemon with guns? Is it much better than that or much worse? Let's dive in. Now, what is Palworld? Is it Pokemon with guns? Is it Ark Survival? Is it Breath of the Wild? There's a lot of different comparisons going around there, and honestly, the reality is it's sort of all of the above. It has the same gliding mechanics like a Breath of the Wild, has the same climbing on any object you see, similar to a Breath of the Wild or like a Genshin Impact, but it's also mostly just a survival game. You run around and you pick up rocks in woods in the beginning of the game and to start building your base. Now, the big thing is the difference between this and other survival games like a Valheim or an Ark Survival is, well, you can actually capture the monsters that you see around the world in your Pal Spheres. And then when you actually look at a monster and you throw your Pal Spear at it, you can catch it. And this is where the Pokemon aspect comes in. But you don't just battle with them. There's actually a lot more you can do with the Pal than just simply battling with them and engaging in combat. You can actually go ahead, go to your base, create a beautiful base that is going to be completely autonomous, so you can actually explore this great and incredible world that is Palworld. Now, here is my base, and I would say this is a pretty late game end game base. I'm pretty much at the very end of the game, and I have multiple bases, but here in my main base, you can see we have a lot going on, right? We have a bunch of different pals working for me. They're mining, they're chopping wood, they're raising crops, they're breeding, they're giving me their wool, and all of this great stuff that I don't actually have to focus on, so I can go out and explore the world. Now, the biggest thing about this is each pal has something they're better at. So let's go through the pal box here. You see that Foxparts has like level 1 kindling, so it's gonna be great at cooking food for me or refining metal. And you can see that Leaf Monk here has a bunch of different stuff that is actually good at. So we got planting, handiwork, lumbering, and medicine production, and all that good stuff. So it's not necessarily just about battling. Some pals are gonna be more geared towards battling. Some pals are gonna be more geared at base work. And you can't really have great battling aspects for your character if you don't have a great base behind you, because this is how you're going to make new weapons, craft ammo, make new armor, and a bunch of other great stuff. And as you see, we have production lines, assembly lines, and it gets really in depth. And how you actually get more stuff is by leveling up in the game, and by leveling up you can get more technology points, and you can unlock different pals to mount and ride into combat. But you can also unlock like wooden gates, hot springs, weapons, armor, all that great stuff, including ancient technology, which is a separate part of the level up that you get from defeating hard bosses in the overworld. But all of this stuff really just lends into you leveling your base up, getting it stronger and better so you can handle the harder aspects of this game. Now, leveling up can definitely be a slog, I will say. Takes a while. I'm at level 44, and this is sort of where the game gets really slow. I would say the first 25 levels of the game is great to level up. You get a lot of items quickly, but it gets to a point where you need to start catching every single pal that you see, and you get a capture bonus. So going into the pal deck here, you can see that land ball, right? I have completed his capture bonus. Every time I catch a land ball up to 10, I get a huge experience bonus. But for Cativi here, I have not caught all of them. So I do want to keep on catching these different pals so I get more experience for my team and for myself, so I can unlock more base building options. And also, the higher my level, the easier it is to capture certain pals, and better for me to actually go into combat against much higher level pals and bosses too. Now, speaking of pals, this is sort of like why people even care about this game, why this game matters whatsoever. And yes, some of these are definitely very Pokemon inspired. Obviously, Lamb Ball, people say, oh, that's like a Wooloo. Well, in my opinion, that's just sort of like a lamb. But some of these are definitely much more. Like Sparkit 100% has a tail of a Raichu, right? Very similar. And they don't really care, the developers, about that. It's obviously like a parody, Pokemon ripoff, Pokemon clones for a lot of these. But some of these are definitely unique, which I do like. Like, I like Jolthog. I think this is a very cute looking pal. Now, there are a lot of pals in the game. There's 111 unique pals, but there's, of course, variants, like, I would say regional forms to make the most sense out of it. And there's over 130 of those, and there are including legendary pals in the game that ends up being your late game content. But some of these do look really cool. Like Incineram looks very badass, and of course, here's a regional variant on top of that. And as you see in the pal deck, each pal has a different thing they're good at. So this one's good at handiwork, mining, and transporting food. Also, you can see what items they drop. So not only do you want to have pals going to your base and working, but sometimes you want to go out into the field and farm certain items that you necessarily can't farm for, like flame organs on this Axox. I can't farm that. I can buy it from a shop, but I could go out in the field, see where this thing is located in the map, go to the habitat map. It's like, okay, these are located all over the map here, go here, knock a bunch out. So this is a really good and engaging feature, and I gotta say the UI of this game is also quite fantastic too. A lot of survival games have a big difficulty with UI aspects, but the UI is super simple. It's super easy to build something, go into crafting mode, build whatever you need. It'll tell you what ingredients you need, and as long as the ingredients are in your base, you can use them. So I don't have any of the ingredients really on me to make things, but yeah, I could make like this ranch, and see it's pulling from like my 46,000 amount of stone I have. So that's a really cool aspect. Now, you can have, of course, multiple bases in the game. I have at least 2, but you can have up to 3 bases. You can put them wherever you want as long as the game says it's okay. And surprisingly, that's going to be most of the game here. Now, something that is not great is pals do get stuck. Their AI gets terrible. So I have this dude. He somehow got over here, which is very annoying. But a lot of your time, especially in the late game, is making sure all your pals are okay. And you're going to have to go into your pals at base option here, put them away, bring them back, and then you're going to have to reassign them to do the things they need to do. So if I have a pal that's supposed to be refrigerating over here for some unknown reason. I don't know why it's not refrigerating, even though I threw them there. I'm going to have to bring the pal out, bring the pal back in, grab the pal, chase them down. Like this is actually the worst part of the game, in my opinion, is just because you can assign pals to certain areas, but their AI will get messed up, or you'll go to sleep, and then for some reason they wake up and want to do something completely different. And sometimes you can throw a pal at the object you want them to work at, and they won't even do it. So we are hoping for some sort of patch. This is early access, and they said they're only 60% done with the game, but we really need that aspect of this game fixed. And it's just incredibly annoying, but it is cool that there is so much that you can do in this game. There's breeding, even though the breeding's not in depth. There's abilities on each pal, even though the abilities aren't that in depth either. But it is very cool that each pal you catch does have different abilities on them, whether they're positive or negatives. And then, of course, you want to breed 2 good pals together to get some positive ones. So you can have a really strong battle team when you want to go out in the field, especially in the harder aspects of the late game. Let's talk about combat. And honestly, combat, not one of my more favorite things in Palworld. I do think this was a little bit overhyped. So essentially, when you see pals, they'll aggress on you or run away, and then you can throw out your pal. Now, you're not completely useless in combat. You can, of course, shoot your guns, use a bow and arrow. You can be more support. You can go melee. You have a different amount of options. However, the combat doesn't really feel that great. There's not a really great sounds to your weapons or the feedback. It all feels quite flat and not necessarily the most engaging. For the most part, all you're gonna do is spam throwing out your pal to the next monster and use a pal that can do super effective damage against the opposing enemies. And when they're low enough, you eventually can catch them. Pretty simple stuff for most of the overworld, and you're gonna be doing this quite often, not just for leveling up and getting EXP by knocking out pals, but also you're gonna be doing this for grinding for materials so you can further improve your base. Now, one funny thing is you can just resend out a different pal and before the other one dies, and then the one in the back will start regenerating their HP. So you can see this is a bad matchup for us, and we're doing a little bit of damage, decent damage, but it's still a bad matchup for us in general. So I want to switch out to a different pal. Now, of course, some pals will have different active abilities like this one. If I use the X button here, I'll be able to heal myself with this pal's ability, which is gonna be very cool. And of course, some other pals you can just ride on them, or for transversal, or like this one, if I ride on it, I actually get a boost to fire type damage while riding on this pal. So it is fairly interesting on the things you can do with that. Now, Palworld does feature bosses as well, and there's a couple ways you can find bosses. One, they're in the overworld, and they'll show up with little icons, which is pretty cool. They'll have the level and information like that. And all the bosses do respawn, and they'll have a little timer. Unfortunately, you can't see the timer from the map. Hopefully, they do add that feature to the game. But there's also dungeons that spawn across the map. And we're currently in a dungeon right now. And dungeons are, I think they're a swing and a miss. I really like the idea of dungeons, but the main issue of dungeons is dungeons are very formulaic. Each region has multiple dungeons. However, these dungeons only have 2 different paths to them. And it's always a set same path. It's like, okay, we either get the dungeon that gives us 4 ways to go into once we're through the first room, or we get the dungeon that has a split path, and we know exactly where the chest spawns every single time. Which can be good for farming because you're supposed to do dungeons to grind out for either different pals or for different schematics that you can use to create different versions of your weapons, which is really cool. But at the same time, it gets very boring. And I noticed that really quickly in my runs that I was like, oh, this is this dungeon again. Oh, this is the same types of enemies that spawn in general here. It just loses its magic pretty quickly, and it's not really that great. And there are real bosses, story bosses, and you can do these multiplayer as well. It's like a 4-player raid, which is actually a really cool idea. However, the main issue with these boss fights is they're all really bullet sponges. They don't really have unique mechanics, unfortunately, which isn't that great. And honestly, there's no real story. There's no real story to this game whatsoever. Outside of like talking to some pretty boring NPCs, you don't really have a rhyme or reason why you're doing anything. You're just doing things to do things in this game, which I do think is fairly disappointing in general. One of my favorite things about a Pokemon type game or monster catching games is the story, the hero's quest, and we really don't get that here. I mean, look at this boss fight. Like, yeah, we're going through it. Super easy boss at this point for us, and you know, we just sit back and relax, watch the AI try to figure out how to actually fight each other. It's like my guy just stopped doing things for no reason. Okay, I'm just going to get switched to Anubis and hope his AI works out. It's definitely still very early access when it comes to this combat situations and things like that. But it is very fun and addicting for sure. I just think it's one of those things, by the 50th hour, you see a lot of the same things over and over again, and then you get just a little bit exhausted for sure. Now, one really cool feature about this game is you can change your world settings when you're about to load in a world. So you can just go to your custom settings, and you can make the game even more fun. So like, if you want to make it so pals are easier to catch, put on that ×2 capture rate. If you just want to hit that level 50 cap as quickly as possible, bring up that experience rate all the way up to 20. You want to make it so daytime is all at a time, then just increase that daytime speed or decrease that nighttime speed. You can increase the damage and everything. You can turn off raids, which I would actually recommend turning off raids because they're incredibly broken and not a great feature in the game whatsoever with no benefit. You can turn off the death penalty so you don't feel bad about dying in the game and doesn't like set you back a lot. Or you can put it on like the hardest settings possible. It's a really cool experience. There are dedicated servers at different levels of tiers of difficulty here, which is really cool, and it's just a nice thing to play with your friends and just have fun in a custom game mode. And I think this feature here is doing the most work for the game right now, because without this game would be such a slog in so many different aspects in terms of leveling, in terms of grinding. And like I said, when you hit that level 40-ish mark, you're gonna want to explore these settings because it can get rather annoying and just drive you up the wall. Now, the game does have a lot of glitches and exploits and things like that, and hopefully they do patch them because the game isn't early access. But something I really need to talk about is the elements, the type chart here. And this is an incredibly basic and simple type chart, which isn't bad. However, it's just not balanced whatsoever. I mean, look at this. Fire beats grass and ice. Dark beats neutral. Neutral doesn't beat anything. I don't know. They could do more. Maybe like one type can beat multiple types that just isn't fire. Fire is de facto the best type in the game. And you have something that's a fire and a dragon type, then you're not afraid of ice and you just automatically become the best pal in the game in terms of combat. So they really got to elaborate on this more. Maybe include more types, figure out more resistances, more super effective types against each other. But I think this is the thing that bothers me the most as a hardcore Pokemon player, because they try to copy these aspects from Pokemon, which is fine, but the execution on it is so poor, it just does not ring well with me whatsoever. Overall, I find Palworld to be a quite enjoyable experience, incredibly addictive and fun, especially for your first about 25 to 30 levels of the game. And then eventually it becomes a chore. You feel like you're logging on, and instead of really exploring this great world of great environments that have all 4 seasons represented with a well-lived-in PAL world, you're going to be spending a lot of your time in your base making sure your pals are not messing up and colliding with the environment around them that you made, and getting everything upgraded so you can actually continue exploring this map. Now, I will say there is no real end game, which I do think is a very disappointing part. This is one of the end game areas. Here's an end game area here, and then this whole volcano is another end game zone too. And it's just, you know, there's no real point to keep on playing once you hit that level 50, defeat the 5 bosses, and then that's it, because there's no story, there's no narrative hook for any of this whatsoever. And I just think that's very disappointing. But like I said, this game is only 60% done, and I can't wait to see what the next 40% is at the end of the day. Right now, I would give this game an 8 out of 10. I think it's a great game. I think it's fun, but they definitely need to rebalance the type chart of this game. They need to rebalance the building and fix the AI pathing on the pals so there is more fun in combat and in base building, because a lot of this stuff that should be easy and resolved already, especially the base stuff with your pals AI pathing, should have been resolved already. But there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed my Palworld review, and if you did, please leave a like, subscribe if you're new. I really appreciate it. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace out and have a good one.